Behind every great success story, there's a hidden cost no one talks about. In today's fast-moving world, pressure doesn't arrive loudly. It settles quietly into daily routines, long hours, and endless expectations. This is where Yuna's story begins, not as a warning, but as a reflection many of us may recognize in ourselves. Yuna is known to the public as a talented and celebrated fashion designer. Her name appears in magazines, her collections light up runways, and her creativity feels effortless to those watching from afar. To her audience, she represents passion rewarded, discipline paying off, and dreams becoming real. Yet behind the polished images and applause is a woman who has learned to measure time in deadlines rather than moments, and rest in pauses between meetings rather than genuine care. From early on, Yuna believed that dedication meant giving everything she had. Every sketch refined late at night, every fitting adjusted at the last minute, every show prepared with absolute focus. She did not see this as sacrifice, but as responsibility. After all, success brought opportunities not only for herself, but for her team, her brand, and the people who believed in her vision. In her mind, slowing down felt almost selfish. As her career grew, so did the expectations. Invitations arrived faster than she could answer them. Creative decisions carried greater weight. Each collection had to surpass the last. Gradually, small personal habits were postponed. Meals were skipped, rest was delayed, and quiet moments became rare. None of this felt dramatic or alarming. It simply became normal. That nothing seemed wrong on the surface. She was doing what society often praises, working hard, staying committed, pushing forward. Many would describe her as disciplined, driven, and admirable. And yet, beneath that admiration was a subtle imbalance that went unnoticed, even by Yuna herself. Standing quietly beside her through these years was Ito, someone who had witnessed her journey from its earliest stages. He had seen the excitement in her eyes when she first spoke about fashion as a language, a way to express ideas without words. He also noticed the gradual change, how conversations became shorter, how laughter became less frequent, how exhaustion hid behind professionalism. His concern did not come from fear, but from care. Ito understood that pressure rarely announces itself clearly. It often disguises itself as ambition, loyalty, or perseverance. Rather than confronting Yuna directly in a way that might feel critical, he chose patience. He believed that lasting success was not about intensity alone, but about endurance. And endurance, he knew, requires balance. This moment in the story invites us to pause and reflect on our own lives. How often do we confuse being busy with being fulfilled? How often do we delay care for ourselves because everything else seems more urgent? Yuna's experience reminds us that imbalance does not begin with collapse. It begins with neglect, even when intentions are good. At its core, this story is not about fashion, fame, or achievement. It is about awareness. It gently asks whether success should be measured only by outcomes, or also by the condition in which we arrive there. When work and health fall out of balance, even the brightest achievements can feel heavier than they should. And sometimes, the most meaningful turning points begin not with failure, but with someone quietly choosing to care enough to intervene. Pressure rarely slows down once it gains momentum, and for Yuna, the pace of her life continued to accelerate. Each new opportunity felt like confirmation that her sacrifices were worth it. Fashion weeks overlapped, creative meetings filled every available hour, and her calendar became a tightly packed puzzle with no empty spaces left. From the outside, It looked like momentum. From the inside, it felt like constant motion without pause. What kept Yuna moving forward was not external pressure alone, but her own sense of responsibility. She believed that as the face of her brand, she needed to be present, decisive, and endlessly creative. If she stepped back, even briefly, she worried that something important might fall apart. This belief quietly shaped her behavior, convincing her that endurance mattered more than balance. Yet excitement still lived in her work. The thrill of unveiling a new collection, the sound of applause, the shared energy backstage before a show, these moments reminded her why she started. They were powerful enough to temporarily mask fatigue. Ito observed all of this carefully. Rather than framing his concern as a problem, Ito chose to frame it as support. He approached the company's leadership with this perspective, emphasizing that long-term creativity depends on well-being, not constant output. The leadership team listened. They had invested not only in Yuna's talent, but in her future. Together, they agreed on a subtle, respectful approach, one that did not interrupt her work, but complemented it. Regular health checkups were introduced as part of a broader culture of sustainability, not as a response to any visible issue. When this idea was presented to Yuna, it did not feel like an intervention. It felt like an invitation to protect what she had built. At first, she accepted it out of practicality, viewing it as another responsibility to manage. But something about the gesture stayed with her. It suggested that success did not have to be earned through exhaustion. Slowly, small shifts began to appear. Yuna started noticing how often she ignored her own signals, simply because she was used to doing so. These realizations did not bring guilt or fear, but clarity. For the first time in a long while, she considered the idea that balance was not a threat to her ambition, but a foundation for it. Yuna had not stopped working, nor had she lost her passion. Instead, she was beginning to understand that success, when supported by care and intention, could feel lighter, steadier, and far more lasting. And in that understanding, excitement returned, not just for what she could create next, but for how she could continue creating without losing herself along the way. As the date of the upcoming fashion show drew closer, the familiar intensity returned, but this time it carried a different tone. The preparation was just as demanding, yet Yuna approached it with a heightened sense of awareness. Instead of pushing through each day on momentum alone, she began paying attention to how her body and mind responded to the rhythm of her work. This awareness did not slow her down. It sharpened her focus. Behind the scenes, the creative process felt more intentional. Yuna allowed herself moments to step back and observe her designs with fresh eyes, rather than rushing from one decision to the next. These pauses, though brief, created space for clarity. Ideas connected more naturally, and problem-solving felt less forced. The work remained challenging, but it no longer felt overwhelming. Ito noticed the difference almost immediately. Conversations became more open, less hurried. Yuna spoke not only about what needed to be done, but why it mattered to her. Her passion, once buried beneath pressure, began to surface again in quieter, more authentic ways. The atmosphere around the team shifted as well. When their leader appeared more grounded, everyone felt more confident and supported. The company leadership observed these changes with interest. Productivity remained strong, yet the environment felt healthier. This reinforced an important lesson, often overlooked in high-performance industries. Sustainable success does not come from constant urgency, but from consistency built on well-being. Yuna's experience was becoming a living example of that principle. As the show day approached, anticipation filled the air. This event was more than another presentation. It marked a defining moment in Yuna's career. Normally, such pressure might have felt heavy. This time, however, it felt purposeful. She trusted her preparation, her team, and herself. Growth does not require ignoring personal limits. In fact, understanding and respecting those limits often unlocks deeper potential. Yuna's journey shows that awareness can transform pressure into purpose and effort into meaning. It became clear that this success was not accidental. It was the result of alignment between ambition and care, passion and sustainability. The runway reflected more than fashion. It reflected a shift in mindset that allowed Yuna to stand confidently in her achievement, fully present and fully herself. When the lights dimmed and the runway came alive, the audience sensed something special. Applause filled the space, but Yuna experienced it differently than before. Instead of relief, she felt gratitude. Instead of urgency, she felt calm. The success of the show did not feel like a finish line, but a confirmation. Confirmation that caring for herself had not diminished her creativity. It had refined it. For Yuna, this moment marked more than a professional milestone. It represented a quiet realization that success, when built thoughtfully, can feel sustainable rather than exhausting. She had not changed her ambition, lowered her standards, or stepped away from her passion. Instead, she had learned to listen, both to the people who supported her and to herself. Ito's concern had never been about slowing Yuna down or limiting her potential. By choosing empathy over urgency and guidance over pressure, he helped create an environment where growth could continue without sacrifice. Within the company, Yuna's experience quietly influenced the culture. For Yuna personally, balance became an ongoing practice rather than a one-time adjustment. Balance, she realized, was not about perfection, but about awareness and choice. This story carries a lesson that reaches far beyond fashion or public success. Many people equate achievement with constant effort, believing that rest or care signals weakness. Yuna's journey gently challenges that belief. It shows that caring for oneself is not a retreat from responsibility, but a commitment to longevity and quality. The most meaningful outcome of Yuna's experience was not the recognition she received, but the clarity she gained. This harmony allowed her to show up fully, not just on the runway, but in her daily life. Are we measuring it only by what we produce, or also by how we live while producing it? Yuna's story reminds us that true achievement is not about reaching a single peak, but about sustaining the journey with care, awareness, and purpose. In a world full of pressure, choosing balance is a quiet act of strength. And as Yuna's path shows, it is often this choice that allows us not only to succeed, but to shine, consistently and completely, over time.